Hello, everyone. This is KW0415, and in this recording, we are going to talk about the law of karma, the very, very basics that I can really, um, that I can really transfer to everyone with some form of confidence, because it is a very complicated topic, and there are very complicated interactions when it comes to the law of karma. And we're going to start out by stating what karma is, what kinds of karma there are, and the influence of karma basically on things, objects. So let's talk about how what is karma. So when it comes to karma, I tend to think of it as energy. So there is karmic energy that's going as long as we sort of are existing, and that karmic force, that karmic energy, sort of drives certain things that happen in our lives, as well as future lives if it comes to that. If we become awakened, that becomes a non-issue. But many of us are, at least from a Buddhist perspective, those that become awakened are far less than those that uh what am I trying okay, I'm going to rephrase that. So from a Buddhist perspective, it's more common for people to stay unawakened than it is to become awakened. It doesn't seem like that sometime in the text because it seems like it's so simple and easy, but that's not really how that works. That's sort of like an inspiring thing, though. So we have to take a look at what karma is. So it's that energy, right? But how is that energy sustained? It is through intentional action. So um, intentional action are actions either by our body, by our speech, or by our thoughts that we take with some form of intention. And those three roots of greed, hatred, delusion, and then the three sort of antidotes, those play a big part into what those intentional actions are. And sometimes we act and something happens, but there was no intention whatsoever. That being on an ant, for example, when you go outside, you may not have even been aware that the ant was there. Therefore, there was really no intention to the action. So the result is, well, yes, you killed an ant, but when it comes to karmic energy that's being added or depleted, it's pretty nominal. It's not really all that substantial compared to if you intentionally murder a human being, which takes considerably more energy and more thought for some people. Sometimes you can go into a mad rage and it isn't really that much of an issue. But that's sort of, I think that's sort of an anomaly. Um, Most of the time, if you're going to murder someone, I would argue it's premeditated. You've thought about it and are going to carry it out in a certain way. However, karma is extremely complex. It's not what goes around comes around. It's sort of, well, what kind of karma is it? And when will that come to fruition, if at all, is sort of what it is. However, we've also thought, not myself personally, but a teacher that I used to listen to, he said, think of the law of karma, think about your actions, and think about it as a probability. The more the more well-intentioned things that we do, the higher the probability that awesome things will happen and pleasant things will happen. And then on the flip side, the more times we take action with unwholesome intention, the more likely it is that unpleasant things are going to occur. So when it comes to karma, there are different ways to categorize it. There's function, there's order of ripening, there's time of ripening, and basically, is it wholesome or unwholesome based upon the roots that it's acted upon? Is it greed or is it non-hatred or what's going on there? So, action, speech, and thoughts. So bodily, verbal, and mental actions that are wholesome or unwholesome, sort of keep that wheel turning. So the wholesome part, generosity, goodwill, wisdom. The unwholesome, greed, hatred, delusion, those three roots that we talked about previously. And then we get into more specifics. Functional karma. So that sort of energy, what is that energy put toward? There's productive karma, and I'm sorry if I'm not looking straight at the camera. I need to take the notes so that I don't get this incorrect. So there's rebirth linking. We're going to talk about rebirth linking when it comes to rebirth in the next sort of recording and resultants, so that they're come to fruition during a lifetime, or things that constitute the present sort of lifespan. So our physical bodies, for example, whether we're beautiful or not so beautiful, that is sort of productive karma. Then there's supportive, which supports existing karma, therefore extending its time of results. So I may do something that is perceived to be and is well intended, and therefore it makes me appear more beautiful to someone. That's basic psychology there. And then there's obstructive karma, shortening the duration or future future rebirth. Sorry. So that means that the lifespan may be shortened depending on what is done. Then there's destructive karma, which prevents ripening of weaker karma and can produce own results according to some. So the teachers aren't really 100% set on what destructive karma really results in. And it's very difficult because there are many texts that talk about it. There are many commentaries from those texts that talk about it. And so it's very difficult to sort of synthesize everything, come to a solid conclusion. So that's function. So we got to think, well, what is the function of the karma? And for those of us that are not awakened, that's very difficult to do. We can recite these things, we can memorize these things, but we can't really know for sure unless we're an awakened being how these things are sort of coming to fruition. Then there's order of ripening. So not only is it productive karma, but is it weighty karma? Um, and weighty karma cannot be replaced when rebirth occurs. So it can be wholesome, which is but it can also be unwholesome. So patricide, matricide, wounding a Buddha, schism of the Sangha with ill intentions, murdering an Arahant who is an awakened being. And it can be insurmountable if it is one of those five things. It's just going to happen. And it's said that anyone who engages in those actions are automatically sent to any of the 108 Buddhist hells. So, congratulations to them if they do that. But at the same time, if it's jhana, for example, which is a very high state of concentration, that's considered wholesome, and that can outweigh other forms of it can out prioritize other forms of karma that I'm going to be talking about. Then there's death proximate. It's very potent and arises before death and generates rebirth if there's no weighty karma in the way, which is one reason why Buddhist monks, when they are comforting someone who's about to die, will say, "Think about the wholesome things you have done." That way, death proximate karma will come to fruition at the time of death, and therefore there will be a pleasant or a desirable rebirth. Once again, that's not a guarantee if you have weighty karma there. But it increases the probability, which is basically what we're talking about. Um, it was once compared to a probability curve, and I described sort of the process earlier. Then there's habitual karma, which can be wholesome or unwholesome, and it's done habitually and will initiate rebirth in absence of weighty or potent death proximate karma. So maybe you're not thinking about anything wholesome that you've done, but that sort of habitual karma will come in to play. And then there's reserve karma, which is sort of miscellaneous. It's potent enough to generate rebirth if the other three are not present. I imagine that those are rare circumstances because it seems like those other three are extremely important, probably more common. So now we have the function, we have the order, and then we have the time of ripening. So there could be immediately effective. That happens in the same existence of performance. So sometimes people are like, well, is this an instance of instant karma? It could be, but I can't really verify for you. And it can also become defunct. It can become defunct if it does not come to fruition. And we're going to talk about defunct in when it comes to time of ripening in a little bit. That if there's the immediate effective, and then there's subsequently. So this is immediately after the life in which the action is performed. And it can also become defunct, depending on circumstances. There are a lot of things here where it depends on the circumstance. Then there's indefinite. It ripens at any time from the second existence onward and cannot become defunct. So this is a very strong sort of karma. And then we have the defunct karma, which is immediate and subsequent karma that do not ripen. So the conditions were not favorable, it did not ripen. And it, for an example of this, is if one becomes an Arahant and the Arahant passes away. So the highest sort of in the sort of hierarchy, I guess you might say, of those who have achieved some sort of spiritual awakening, the Arahant is the highest. They are fully awakened. They're sort of like the Buddha, except they didn't discover the path. They've traveled the path to the destination. So once an Arahant passes away, completely defunct. Everything is the immediate and subsequent karma is completely defunct, and they don't have any indefinite karma at that point in time. So then you got to consider place. Where does this karma come to fruition? Is it in the sense sphere plane? So the human plane, for example, is a sense sphere, and that can be unwholesome or wholesome. So where um, a being is experiencing the results that can be pleasant or wholesome, or unpleasant from unwholesome. How about the fine material sphere, which is sort of one of the lower spheres of existence for the devas or the gods? Um, that can, and they don't really experience unwholesome results. It's basically divine pleasure at that point. And then wholesome in the immaterial sphere, so that's purely mental, because they don't have any material body. Um, so wholesome in the immaterial sphere, for example. And just because, they're experiencing wholesome results doesn't mean there is not perhaps reserve karma that is unwholesome and will result in possibly a rebirth in a lower plane of existence, which there are 31 in my tradition of Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism. So when someone says what goes around comes around explains karma, or karma's a bitch or anything like that, that's a very that's a very generalized, oversimplified version, because we got to take all of these into consideration. However, the general consensus is, and based upon Dharma talks that I've listened to, things that I've read, is it's one of those situations where doing wholesome things, wholesome thoughts, wholesome actions with the body and speech, it's one of those things where it can't hurt to keep doing those things because that can potentially lead to wholesome results, whether it be in this life or a next life or a subsequent life, if rebirth keeps occurring. So you can't really, it's one of those things you can't have enough of necessarily. So every opportunity that we have where we can take wholesome action and not take wholesome action for a greedy purpose because then it taints it. So I could say, I'm going to go to the food bank and I'm going to donate my time, help them, you know, organize everything and hand out food because I could potentially be reborn as a god. That sort of taints the experience. And so it's your intention doesn't need to be 100% pure, but that sort of taints the experience. So we're working toward doing that because we truly want to do that. We want to, out of goodwill or compassion, not out of sort of greedy self interest for the future life, for example. And that's very difficult to do because when you think about it, unless you become a monk, when you're a monk, it becomes, I want to achieve nirvana. But when you're a lay person, you're like, I just really want to have more favorable circumstances at some point. And so you're thinking, probably in the back of your mind sometimes, I'm going to do this great thing because I do want to help people, but I also want to help myself. In my opinion, that's very difficult to purify because we do have self-interest as human beings. But at the same time, I don't think that necessarily means that it's going to hurt. I think that it still could potentially be helpful. It depends upon, many other factors, like how strong that desire is for a future rebirth. Does that outweigh the intensity of your goodwill toward other people? So there are a lot of factors that go into consideration when it comes to the law of karma. And the law of karma, there's been a simile that's been out there, and I like to use it because it's somewhat easy to comprehend. So when an action is taken, it's like planting the seed. And if the conditions are correct, that seed comes to fruition, blooms into a flower. Whether that's a pleasant smelling flower or a corpse flower or something that isn't so pleasant depends upon our intention there. However, if the conditions are not favorable, so uh, there's not enough water or not enough sunlight or whatever, then that seed does not turn into a flower. It sort of withers, and or it stays as a seed for as long as it's able to. And so that's sort of how karma works. We take actions, and then at the appropriate time, it comes to fruition. And there's no a divinity or higher power that enacts these sort of that enacts the law of karma. It's a natural law according to Buddhist philosophy. So it's one of those things that it's just going to happen. There's no person that's controlling it. It just sort of happens. And I was talking to someone who's a very devout Christian, like, oh, so is there a divine being or something that implements this sort of law? And it's no, it's a natural law according to Buddhist philosophy. There's no particular being that is implementing these results. It happens when it's supposed to happen. So that's all I really want to say about the law of karma. I know it's a very confusing topic, and therefore I am always welcome to questions on it. And if I don't know the answer, I can try and find someone who might have an answer. That being, I'll try and find a monk that will answer that question. Or if maybe if it's in a text, I'll go ahead and I'll give the text. And when it comes to this information, I got it from the Abhidhamma. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll put the source in the description so that you can actually see that it is an actual source. All right, so next time we're going to talk about rebirth. We're going to talk about the process and how karma comes into it. And another sort of side note about karma is it may influence sort of like physical appearance or our sort of our vulnerability to illness and all that, but it's not the result of all things. Not all things are a result of karma. So if someone sneezes on me and I get sick, 2 days later, that's not necessarily karmic. That's germ theory. So that's something to keep in mind as well when it comes to karma. But in the next recording, we'll talk about rebirth, and then I'm going to do a bonus recording for basic Buddhism about what if you want to start a Buddhist practice? Where would you start? And once again, this is informative. I'm not trying to convert you to Buddhism. And when we talk about a Buddhist practice, I'll explain to you why. So until the next recording, everyone take care of yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.